What happens when a billionaire, used to commanding boardrooms and dominating Wall Street, meets a quiet, observant little girl from the other side of society over a chessboard? He thought he was being kind. He thought he was doing a favor, a moment of charity, a passing amusement, just a game of chess with the daughter of his housemaid. But what unfolded in that luxurious living room wasn't just a game. It was a quiet revolution. She didn't come with noise or demands. She came with quiet eyes and a humble smile. A girl in second-hand clothes, carrying no toys, no tablet, just a quiet brilliance that no one had taken the time to notice. As the billionaire set the board and made his first move, he smiled, confident and relaxed. He didn't know that he was about to be outplayed, not just on the board, but in his understanding of power, genius, and the invisible brilliance that lives in places society often refuses to look. This is not just a story about chess. It's about assumptions. It's about what happens when we underestimate someone because of their background, their color, their silence. It's about a little girl whose mind was sharper than the silver utensils on that billionaire's table. And it's about a man who, for the first time in decades, realized he wasn't the smartest person in the room. But how did she get here? How did a girl with no private tutor, no elite school, no privilege, learn the ancient strategies of kings and queens and rooks? What made her mind so agile, her intuition so precise? This is where the real story begins. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been judged before anyone saw your potential, then this story is for you. And if you're already feeling something stirring in your chest, if you're starting to see the layers behind this simple chess match, pause for a second. Leave a like on this video. It helps more people find stories like this. Stories that challenge stereotypes, celebrate hidden genius, and remind us of the power of resilience. And tell me in the comments, have you ever surprised someone who doubted you? Or maybe you've witnessed a moment like this, quiet brilliance shining through where no one expected it. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, because this channel is all about real stories that reveal the truth behind power, race, and human potential. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. And let's go back to the beginning, to the moment she stepped through the gates of that mansion, the moment everything quietly began to shift. She stepped out of the car quietly, her sneakers just barely skimming the polished stones of the billionaire's driveway. The house stood like a monument to wealth, white pillars, glass walls, hedges trimmed with obsessive precision. She looked up for a second, wide-eyed but calm, taking it all in as her mother, dressed in her work uniform, hurried to catch up. The maid had asked permission to bring her daughter that day. School was closed, and she had no one to leave the girl with. The billionaire, distracted and in a rush that morning, had waved his hand dismissively and said, "Sure, just keep her out of the way." No one paid her any attention when they walked through the back entrance. No one noticed the child watching everything, the rhythm of the house, the voices of the staff, the way the billionaire spoke fast and sharp when he passed by. She sat quietly in the kitchen while her mother worked, sketching shapes with her finger on the countertop. The housekeeper offered her cookies. The gardener gave her a kind smile, but she kept mostly to herself until the sound of clicking caught her attention. From the open doorway she saw it, an antique chess set laid out on a marble table in the main lounge, pieces already arranged. She walked closer, drawn by curiosity, not greed. She wasn't thinking of showing off. She wasn't thinking at all. It was instinct. She knew those pieces. She knew the moves. Her fingers itched to play. That's when he saw her. The billionaire had returned early from his meeting and was pouring himself a glass of wine. His eyes landed on the small figure standing near his favorite table. He didn't recognize her at first, just a child staring at the chessboard. Maybe the daughter of a guest. No. Then he noticed the uniformed woman moving quickly to fetch something in the hallway. The maid. This was her daughter. He raised an eyebrow, amused. "You like chess?" he asked, stepping into the room with casual dominance. The girl nodded. "I've played before," she said quietly. He laughed softly. "You know how to play? Really?" Her nod was smaller this time, but her eyes never left the board. Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was ego, but in that moment the billionaire made a decision that would haunt him for days. "All right then," he said, walking over and sitting down. "Let's play, just for fun." She looked at her mother, who had just reappeared in the doorway, eyes wide with panic. But the man waved her off. "It's fine, just a little game." And just like that, she sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap, waiting for him to make the first move. He opened with the king's pawn, classic, safe, confident. She mirrored the move, without hesitation. And though the staff went back to their duties and the moment seemed small and unimportant, something had already begun. A shift, a quiet crack in the glass wall between two worlds. What he didn't know, what no one in that house knew, is that this wasn't the first time she'd sat at a chessboard, not by far. He leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who had long grown used to being the smartest person in any room. His fingers rested lightly on the edge of the chessboard, swirling his wine with the other hand, eyes studying her, not as an opponent, but as an anomaly, something curious, harmless, and forgettable. She met his gaze only once, briefly. Then her eyes returned to the board. "You know the names of the pieces?" he asked, half joking. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "That's the rook. That's the knight. That's the bishop. The queen is the most powerful." He raised an eyebrow, mildly impressed. "That's right. Most people think the king matters more." She looked at him then, not defiant, not bold, just clear. Without the queen, the king is almost helpless. For a second, he didn't know how to respond. There was no sarcasm in her tone, no clever smirk. Just truth, stated plainly. He took a sip of wine and gestured for her to begin. "Ladies first." She made her move quickly, confidently. He nodded, pretending not to be surprised. The game progressed slowly. At first, he made every move with ease, almost absent-mindedly, assuming he could recover from any mistake. But then, 10 moves in, he paused. She had positioned her pieces in a way that didn't feel random. It was structured, tactical. He furrowed his brow slightly and made a more careful move. She responded within seconds. He chuckled. "You've played before, not just once or twice." She didn't answer. "You know," he continued, "most kids your age get bored halfway through. They move pieces just to move them, but you're patient." Still, she said nothing. Her silence began to gnaw at him. It wasn't rude, it was focused, controlled, as if the game demanded all her attention and anything outside of it was simply background noise. The billionaire shifted in his seat. In the hallway, one of the house staff peeked in and stopped. The game had lasted longer than expected. 10 minutes turned into 20, then 30. The girl's mother returned, trying to apologize, but the billionaire waved her off again. "We're in the middle of something," he said, eyes never leaving the board. That was the moment it shifted, from a casual gesture to a personal challenge. She captured his bishop with a quiet move that cornered his remaining knight. He leaned forward. "Who taught you this?" he asked, now fully engaged. "I learned by watching." "Watching who?" "Videos at the library." His jaw tightened slightly. "No coach? No lessons?" She shook her head. He stared at her for a long second, unsure whether to be skeptical or shaken. "You ever played in a tournament?" "No." "You ever played anyone good?" She looked up and answered calmly, "I'm playing someone now." The room went still. For a man who had built empires, acquired companies and negotiated with heads of state, that single sentence carried more weight than any boardroom insult. It wasn't just cheeky, it was factual, delivered without malice, just the way she saw it. Something in him cracked, pride or perception. He leaned in now, no more wine in hand, no more smirking. This wasn't a game anymore. This was a test. And he was no longer the examiner. He had played this opening dozens of times, hundreds perhaps, a safe opening, a slow burn. He had used it to defeat tech moguls, visiting politicians, even a grandmaster once at a charity gala. It was methodical, predictable, and it always gave him time to study his opponent. But this time, something was wrong. By move 12, she had maneuvered her queen to an unexpected square, aggressive, calculated, and placed with unsettling precision. He stared at the board. It wasn't just the placement. It was the trap it revealed. If he moved his rook to defend his knight, as he usually would, she'd check him within 3 moves. If he moved his bishop instead, she'd collapse the center and dismantle his whole strategy. It was elegant. He blinked slowly, his fingers hovering over the board, then drawing back. She waited patiently, eyes steady. No gloating, no signs of triumph, just silence. In that moment, he realized she was playing far beyond her years, and certainly far beyond what he had imagined for the daughter of a maid. That unspoken thought hovered over the room like thick air, pressing against his pride. Still, he played on. He chose the least damaging option, sacrificing position to stall her advance. The move bought him 2 turns, but her next play was immediate. A pin, sharp and irreversible. She was closing in, and fast. In the hallway, a butler paused again, now joined by a housekeeper. They didn't speak, but their expressions said it all. Disbelief, wonder, curiosity. Whispers began to stir around the house, not loud or disrespectful, but present. Eyes began to follow the girl. In the kitchen, her mother clutched a dish towel and glanced nervously toward the door. She didn't understand the game well enough to follow the moves, but she could read tension. She knew the way her boss's jaw tightened when he was losing control. Inside the lounge, the girl's posture remained unchanged, upright, calm. Her fingers moved the pieces with clarity and ease, like someone who had practiced in the dark, who had played invisible games against imagined opponents for years. The billionaire leaned back, crossed his arms, then uncrossed them. He cleared his throat. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar in this room, a feeling that didn't exist in his meetings, his interviews, his negotiations. Uncertainty. "How old are you?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. 11, she replied. He blinked. "You play like someone twice that." She tilted her head slightly. "I've been playing since I was 6. He tried to smile, to bring levity back into the moment. "Do you know who Garry Kasparov is?" She nodded. "He lost to a computer once, but not because he wasn't smart. The machine just didn't get tired." The billionaire's smile faded. This wasn't trivia knowledge. This was understanding. He studied her again. The confidence wasn't arrogance, it was experience. Quiet, internal, earned without praise. She hadn't come here to win. She hadn't come here for anything at all. She had simply followed the game. And now the game was turning. His king was exposed. His pawns scattered. His pride cracking. Another move, another sacrifice. He reached to touch his rook again and paused. "She's baiting me," he thought. He moved anyway, and regretted it instantly. Her knight leapt forward, a clean capture, a perfect fork. He stared at the board, speechless. He had been outmaneuvered, not by a rival CEO, not by a trained prodigy from an elite academy, but by a girl in hand-me-down sneakers whose mother polished his floors every morning. He looked up, his expression unreadable, and saw her watching him, not with judgment, not with superiority, but with quiet patience, waiting for him to see what she had seen all along, that it was never just a game. He stared at the chessboard, but his mind was no longer on the game. It was spinning inward, pulled into a quiet storm of thoughts he didn't recognize. Shame, maybe, confusion, discomfort, certainly. He had been outplayed, yes, but it wasn't the loss that unsettled him. It was who had beaten him. She was a child, a black girl, the daughter of his maid. The realization wasn't a headline in his mind, but a whisper laced with decades of conditioning. He had always seen himself as fair, progressive even. He donated to inner-city programs. He gave bonuses at Christmas. He made sure his company celebrated diversity. But here, in the quiet privacy of his home, something inside him resisted the truth of what had just happened. He began to rationalize. She must have memorized some strategy. Maybe someone coached her. Could be luck. But deep down, he knew better. He had played hundreds of games. He could feel it when someone saw the board with clarity, when they weren't reacting but shaping the game. And she was shaping this one from the very first move. Still, he couldn't help but question it. Not because of the game itself, but because of her. Would he have doubted a white boy in the same seat? A young guest from a country club, dressed in a collared shirt, boasting about his chess trophies? Probably not. Would he have assumed talent rather than trickery? He felt something tightening in his chest. It wasn't just ego, it was identity. For so long, he had lived in a world where intelligence was rewarded, yes, but also filtered. Through resumes, through references, through zip codes and school names and country of origin. She had none of those credentials, and yet she had just dismantled him. He looked up at her again. She wasn't gloating. In fact, she seemed unaware of the mental war he was fighting. Her hands were still, her face neutral, her focus intact, the kind of presence that can't be taught, the kind that isn't loud, but commands space. And suddenly, he realized how many times in his life he had missed this, how many voices he had overlooked because they came wrapped in the wrong packaging. How many meetings he had led, where someone brilliant sat silent, knowing they wouldn't be heard. How many ideas he had dismissed because the person delivering them didn't look the part. He felt a wave of heat rise to his face, not because of her, but because of himself. And still, somewhere in the back of his mind, the resistance remained. She's smart, sure, but she's an exception. She's rare. It was his final defense, his last layer of denial. Because if she wasn't rare, if there were more girls like her hidden in libraries, watching YouTube videos in public Wi-Fi spots, studying in silence while the world ignored them, then what did that say about everything he believed? About meritocracy? About opportunity? It would mean the system wasn't just flawed, it was rigged. And worse, it would mean he had benefited from that rigging his entire life. He looked at her again. She was watching the board, waiting, not demanding recognition, not asking for permission, just playing. That quiet strength, the refusal to explain herself, to shrink, to apologize, began to strip away the last of his rationalizations. He wasn't losing to a fluke. He was facing something he had never prepared for. Genius dressed in humility, and he was not ready. By now, the atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. What had begun as a light-hearted game, a small gesture of noblesse oblige, had turned into a silent battleground, not of anger or insult, but of realization, and the billionaire was no longer playing with confidence. He was playing with caution, with doubt. She, on the other hand, remained steady. Her fingers moved deliberately, gracefully. Every placement of a pawn or knight felt like a statement, calm but unshakable. She didn't fidget. She didn't hesitate. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying to win his approval. She was simply doing what she had done countless times in the quiet of her room, or in the back of the library, where the Wi-Fi barely reached. She had learned this game in solitude, without applause. And now, here, under the chandelier light of a marble-floored mansion, she was simply playing as she always had. But for him, everything was different. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, lips pressed tightly. The wine glass sat untouched beside him now, forgotten. His eyes scanned the board, searching for possibilities that weren't there. He had played against lawyers, investors, even one or two ranked players, but no match had ever felt like this, because this one wasn't just about winning. It was about something being dismantled inside him. Quietly, piece by piece, she moved her bishop, and a low gasp escaped the butler standing by the door. The move wasn't flashy, but it was surgical. It cut through his defense with precision. He hadn't seen it coming, and now his king was exposed again. "Beautiful," he whispered without meaning to. She looked up briefly, just a blink. Then back to the board. The room had grown still. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to fade. Every servant who could find a reason to linger nearby now stood silent, watching, stunned. Not because a child was playing chess, but because she was commanding the space with quiet power, unshaken by the man across from her. He felt sweat on the back of his neck, not from the heat, from something deeper, a sense of being unmoored. He made his move. It was defensive, a retreat. She responded without pause. Then came a moment that neither of them would forget. He reached for his queen to reposition. His hand hovered above it, and suddenly he stopped. His eyes widened. He had made a mistake. If he moved it there, if he followed his instinct, he'd fall into a trap, one she had clearly set. He dropped his hand and leaned back slowly. His pride screamed at him. His instincts pushed him to power through, but something else, something quieter, told him to stop and look again. And when he did, he saw it. He had underestimated her, not just her ability, her presence. She wasn't playing with luck. She wasn't playing by accident. She had seen 3 moves ahead. She had anticipated his defense, his offense, even his ego. It was all there, in the way her pieces surrounded him. He exhaled sharply. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about money or meetings or mergers. He was thinking about this girl, about how much he had never known, about how her existence, her brilliance, her calm defiance of his assumptions had cracked something open in him. He looked at her, not as a curiosity anymore, but as an equal, maybe even more than that. She moved her queen again, a check, and in that moment, it wasn't about power, it wasn't about class, it was about truth. And the truth was sitting across from him, in sneakers and braids, asking nothing but revealing everything. Long before she ever touched the polished ivory pieces on the Billionaire's board, her world was shaped by chipped tiles, second-hand books, and a mother who believed in quiet miracles. Her first chessboard wasn't made of wood or stone. It was a wrinkled sheet of paper, hand-drawn with a ruler, the squares uneven, some faded by the touch of time and fingers. The pieces were bottle caps, coins, buttons, whatever her mother could find that wouldn't roll off the kitchen table. She was 6 the day she saw 2 boys playing chess outside the community center. She didn't know the rules. She didn't know the names of the pieces, but she watched. She watched every move, every exchange, every expression on their faces. Something about it felt familiar, not the game, but the rhythm, the logic, the silence between the plays. That night she asked her mother what game it was. Chess, her mother said softly. It's like a war, but with rules and with respect. Respect. That word stayed with her. Her mother didn't know how to play, but she brought home a tattered book from the donation box the next week. It had no cover, and half its pages were missing. But it was enough. Diagrams, drawings, notes in the margins from some previous owner. She devoured it. When they couldn't afford internet at home, she sat outside the library on weekends, using public Wi-Fi to watch grainy chess videos on an old phone with a cracked screen. She watched grandmasters play in tournaments she would never be invited to, breaking down strategies she barely understood, until she did. Her fingers began to move faster. Her mind mapped the board in dreams. At school, no one noticed. She was quiet, a little too smart, a little too serious, not loud enough to be admired, not defiant enough to be feared, just invisible. And yet, at home, the kitchen table became her arena. Every night after homework and dishes, she set up her paperboard. Sometimes her mother would sit across from her, pretending to be an opponent, moving pieces at random just to keep her company. One day, a retired janitor from their building, a man who had once taught chess to his own sons, saw her practicing in the courtyard. "You like that game?" he asked. She nodded. "Show me what you know." They played for hours. He was her first real opponent, and the first to lose to her more than once. He told her she had something special, not just intelligence, but patience, discipline, the ability to see patterns where others only saw chaos. She didn't play for praise. She didn't play for recognition. She played because it made sense. Because when the world felt heavy, unfair, loud, chess gave her clarity, rules, purpose, a way to move forward even when she felt stuck. Sometimes she played in her mind when she couldn't sleep. Other times, she taught younger kids in the neighborhood, drawing boards in the dirt or on pizza boxes, explaining the power of the queen, the danger of rushing the king, the wisdom of sacrifice. No trophies, no medals, just a quiet mastery growing in the shadows. And now, that mastery had followed her here, to this mansion, to this room, to this board. No one in that house could see where she came from. They saw a maid's daughter, a child, a girl with no reason to be exceptional, but every move she made was backed by years of silent work. Every check she delivered was born from 100 losses played alone. And every glance she gave to the man across from her carried the weight of all the moments she had been underestimated. She had not been taught by the elite. She had not been trained by masters. She had trained herself, and the world would have never known, if not for this one game. Word began to spread through the mansion like a ripple in still water. It started with a whisper between two kitchen staff. Then the housekeeper glanced toward the lounge and quietly motioned to another. One by one, they found excuses to pass by the doorway, lingering just long enough to catch a glimpse of the impossible. The billionaire, sharp, precise, always in control, was locked in a game he couldn't command. And across from him, with quiet posture and unshaken focus, sat the maid's daughter, guiding the game like a storm behind calm eyes. No one spoke at first. They didn't need to. The rhythm of the match said everything. The staff had seen this room host dignitaries and moguls. They'd watched the billionaire toast foreign investors, laugh too loudly, boast of deals struck and fortunes grown. But they had never seen him like this, tense, uncertain, almost vulnerable. He leaned over the board with furrowed brows, analyzing her every move with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that kept reshaping itself. Meanwhile, she sat still, her hands resting in her lap between plays, her eyes scanning the board like a seasoned general reading a battlefield. Outside, the sun had begun to dip. Golden light poured through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. It made the chessboard glow, and for a moment the scene looked like something out of a painting, power and innocence, locked in silence. Then came the guests. A pair of investors had arrived early for dinner, expecting wine and laughter. But when they entered the lounge, they paused, puzzled by the hushed crowd forming along the walls. Their host didn't greet them. He barely noticed their arrival. One of them approached quietly. "Is this a joke?" he whispered to a butler nearby. The butler shook his head. "She's winning," he replied simply. The guest laughed, then stopped as he looked at the board and saw the truth. It wasn't just a game. It was a lesson, written not in words, but in each carefully considered move. The kind of lesson that lingers longer than any lecture. A reversal of roles happening right before their eyes. The tension grew. With every piece the girl captured, the room seemed to lean in. No one dared interrupt. No one dared distract her. It felt sacred, an unspoken agreement that something important was happening. The billionaire, for all his influence and experience, began to shrink slightly in his seat. Not physically, but in presence. His confidence, once so unshakable, had eroded into deep concentration. He knew now, without a doubt, that he was in danger of losing. Not just the match, but the illusion. The illusion that power always wears a suit, that brilliance always comes from privilege, that greatness only arrives with applause. She made another move. Knight to e5. It was bold, clean, perfect. The billionaire stared, blinked, and sighed. His hand hovered above his king, but he couldn't bring himself to move. "She's got him," someone murmured from the hallway. The girl's mother stood nearby, wringing her hands, unsure if she should intervene or stay invisible. Her daughter hadn't looked back once. She wasn't playing for show. She wasn't playing to embarrass. She was playing because it was the one place in the world where she didn't need permission to be great. And now, everyone in that mansion was beginning to see it. She wasn't the help's daughter anymore. She was the center of gravity, and for the first time, the house wasn't revolving around wealth or power. It was revolving around a girl who had nothing, but saw everything. The room had become a cathedral of silence. Every breath felt held, every glance fixed on the board. Even the chandelier's gentle sway overhead seemed to pause mid-motion, as if the entire mansion had surrendered to the moment. The billionaire sat motionless, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes narrowed in concentration. His empire, his investments, his accolades, all distant now, all replaced by a single question echoing louder in his mind with every passing second. How did I not see this coming? Across from him, she waited. No triumph in her face, no excitement in her posture, just the same steady calm that had carried her from the opening move to the brink of conclusion. She had given him room. She had offered chances, moments where he could have adjusted, rethought, retreated, but he hadn't seen them, or maybe he had refused to. He had played from instinct, from ego, from assumption, and now the price of that blindness sat in front of him in the shape of a single deliberate move. Her queen slid across the board with a gentle click, a clean line, unblockable, inevitable. "Checkmate," she said softly. For a long moment, no one moved. The billionaire stared at the board as if time had frozen. The king was trapped, hemmed in by pawns, blocked by his own rook, defenseless before the queen's final position. The room held its breath. Then came the sound, a slow, quiet exhale. His. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him, and let out a laugh that wasn't quite a laugh, more a release, a small, incredulous surrender to a truth he could no longer deny. He had lost. Not just a game, but a belief that intelligence followed wealth, that genius came dressed in tailored clothes, that the world was already ordered fairly. He looked at her again, really looked, and this time he didn't see the daughter of a maid. He didn't see a child. He saw a mind sharper than most people he had ever met. A force of nature that had entered his world, not with noise or fury, but with quiet certainty, a living rebuttal to every bias he had never questioned. He nodded slowly. "You beat me," he said. She said nothing, only tilted her head slightly, as if surprised by the need for him to say what was already clear. "You're very good," he added. Still, she didn't reply. Because for her, the game had never been about him. It had always been about the board, about truth, about the power of precision and patience. Behind him, someone finally whispered, "She won." The murmurs spread, and then applause, soft, unsure at first, then building. Not because she demanded it, but because the room needed a way to release what it had just witnessed. Her mother covered her mouth with one hand, tears welling in her eyes, unsure whether to smile or apologize. The staff clapped carefully. The guests stood in stunned silence, watching a billionaire who no longer held the center of the room. The center had shifted, and it rested on a child who didn't ask for anything, who had just quietly, brilliantly reminded them all, greatness doesn't knock on the front door. Sometimes it enters through the servant's entrance and changes everything. The room slowly returned to motion, like a spell had been broken. The applause tapered off, replaced by awkward glances and subtle shifts in posture. No one quite knew what to say. Some guests offered faint smiles, others stared at the girl, as though trying to reconcile what they had just witnessed with the version of reality they had arrived believing. The billionaire stood up slowly, not with the casual confidence he usually carried, but with the heavy awareness of a man who had been forced to look at himself in a new, unflattering light. He looked down at the board, then back at the girl, who had not moved from her seat. "Do you know what you just did?" he asked, half in awe, half in disbelief. She looked at him, expression unreadable, and replied, "I played my best. Simple, honest, without agenda." He nodded, almost painfully. His voice was quieter when he spoke again. "You didn't just win a game." She blinked once, still silent. Her mother stepped forward timidly, unsure whether to apologize or take her child by the hand and leave before the moment turned. She had seen powerful men change moods like winds shift, smiling one minute, dismissive the next, but this time felt different, slower, deeper. The billionaire turned to the mother now. "She's..." Extraordinary, he said. Her eyes filled, not with pride alone, but with years of sacrifice, of unspoken hopes folded into each laundry basket, each overtime shift. She nodded, not trusting her voice. One of the guests finally spoke, attempting to inject humor. "Well, that was unexpected." The billionaire gave a dry smile but didn't respond. His mind was far from small talk. Another guest stepped forward. "Do you know what kind of schools would fight for a student like her?" At that, the room seemed to stir with new energy. "She needs to be in a program," said another. "She could compete nationally," offered someone else. The suggestions poured in: scholarships, tutors, elite coaches, private academies. But through it all, the girl stayed quiet. She looked not at the adults tossing her future around like a new investment opportunity, but at her mother. Her face softened. That was the only approval she cared about. And her mother, wiping her eyes, gave the smallest, proudest nod. Then the billionaire did something no one expected. He turned back to the girl. "If I offered to sponsor you," he said slowly, "to provide a coach, a school, anything you need to reach the next level, would you accept it?" There was a pause. Everyone waited. And finally, she answered, gently but firmly, "I don't want to be someone's project." Silence fell again. Not cold, not combative, just true. She added, "I'll accept help, but not pity, not charity." The words landed like thunder wrapped in silk. The billionaire swallowed hard. He nodded again, slower this time. "Then let it be respect." She nodded back. In that moment, something shifted, not just in the room, but in the man himself. He had started the day with the unshakable belief that people like him were the gatekeepers of opportunity. That kindness was something handed down, never across. But now he saw the truth. This girl didn't need permission to be great. She had already proven it. What she needed, what she deserved, was space, support, and most of all, recognition without condition. And maybe, just maybe, he could start there. As the last pieces of the match were quietly returned to their original squares by a housekeeper, and murmurs faded into respectful silence, the billionaire remained standing, hands in his pockets, eyes lost in thought. He wasn't just processing a loss. He was unpacking a shift in worldview that no business merger had ever delivered. The girl stood now, too, slowly and with grace. Her mother approached, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. They were ready to leave, grateful, quiet, dignified. But something in the air held them back, a moment still unresolved. That's when he spoke again. "I have an idea," the billionaire said, turning to them. His voice had changed, not polished, not commanding, but thoughtful. "Not a sponsorship, not a scholarship with my name on it." Everyone turned toward him, curious. He looked at the girl. "What if we built something together?" She tilted her head. He continued, "You don't want to be someone's project, I respect that. But what if we started a chess program? Not for just you, but for others like you. Kids who don't have access. Kids with that same fire in their eyes." The room went still again. "I'll fund it. You'll lead it." Now she blinked. "You've already proven you can teach yourself. Imagine what you could teach others." He wasn't pitching an idea to make himself feel better. He was offering a platform, a shared space, a way to turn this moment into something bigger than either of them. The girl didn't answer right away. She looked up at her mother, who now held back tears, not of worry, but of pride. Then she looked at the man before her, not as a billionaire, not as someone who had once underestimated her, but as someone who was now listening. Finally, she nodded once. "I'll do it," she said, "but it has to be free." He smiled, this time genuinely. "Free it is." The staff exchanged looks of wonder. The guests were silent again, unsure how to fit this into the narrative they'd arrived with. And the girl. She simply turned back toward the chessboard one last time, gently touching the queen before turning away. Later that week, the news would spread. A new initiative backed by a billionaire led by a child genius, open to underserved communities, designed to give young minds the chance to rise beyond their circumstances on their own terms. But none of that would matter as much as the image that stayed with everyone who had been in the room that day. A girl in worn sneakers standing tall in the center of a mansion. A man once certain of his place in the world, now humbled and learning. And a game of chess that had quietly rewritten both of their stories, because sometimes the most powerful checkmate isn't on the board. It's in the heart. If this story moved something inside you, if it made you pause, reflect, or even see the world a little differently, then don't just scroll away. Subscribe to this channel. Here, we share true, powerful stories that shine a light on injustice, resilience, and the brilliance that so often goes unseen. Leave a like if this game of chess said more to you than words ever could. And tell us in the comments, what did you feel watching this girl redefine everything with silence and strategy? Or just write, "I believe in hidden genius." And before you go, don't miss the next story. It's already waiting for you on the screen. Trust me, it's one you'll never forget.